Good evening, class. I am wanting to just connect about the past assignment that everybody handed in, the grief communication assignment. Um, I had some challenges with grading it, and there were some concerns that I had about expectations, and so I figured since this seems to be something that everyone was kind of challenged with, I wanted to put this video out to kind of talk about some of the expectations. I am going to grade as generously as I can within the context of what's going on. I want to establish that this is a post-bachelor continuing education program. So it's really at aiming for like a master's level work, um, while at the same time understanding that this is not a degree seeking program. Um, but I want to support you all in your professional development. And within our professional fields, it really is expected that we are writing and presenting work that is to a professional and also to the level of typically APA formatting. So I'm going to go over a couple things, and then I'll try to provide some individual feedback to you and to each student individually. Um, but I wanted to post this video first so you had some context around your grade, and you have some ideas of what to expect or what the expectation is in the future. Um, so with that said, I do want to first talk about APA formatting, and I'm going to share some references, and I did post it on the class already in Canvas. Um, I posted one or two things, but let me pull up this website, which is really helpful. I don't remember which one I posted, but if you Google APA, it's American Psychological Association, um, and this website, there's a couple websites. This website, and I believe you can see my screen, right? Yep. Or Purdue University is a very common one that's referred to for really strong guidance on how to provide APA formatting. Um, but one of the first things that you can do is look at, go to all topics. You can see how to do the insights in text citations. You can see the format of the paper here, and it actually gives you sample papers. And so I actually am going to show you that now. So the first thing I want to point out, if you can see this now, um, typically APA like projects and papers would have a title page. I don't expect a title page for something like this smaller assignment that we had, and it was a little more casual. But typically this content here, the title, your name, the school, the program that you're in, the course that you're in, that should be included. And then, of course, this is written in the context of like paragraph form, which was not the required expectation for this assignment, although some of you did do some paragraph writing. Um, but if you look, there's insight in text citations like this. And I noticed a lot of students submitted it with references at the bottom, but did not really have many in text citations. So if you have references at the bottom, where are they referenced throughout the page, right? So that's important. Um, and I'm just gonna, this is long, this is an example of a full paper. But you can see references is always a new page, always a new page. It's always its own page. Also we'll note in the lectures, it's always the last slide, it's a new slide. Um, and also the indentation here. It's called, actually, let's pull it up together. So if I right click to enable my editing, just gonna go to the top of the reference page again, sorry. If I right click and I hit paragraph, indents and spacing. right here, indentation. It's called hanging. Hanging, and it hangs by 0.5 of an inch. And so what that does is that makes the last name stick out first. So when you're looking down the list, you can find the last name. So that way, when you find the insight in text citation, you can say, oh, I want to know more about that. Where is this academic reference coming from? And then we go by bean. Okay, bean, and there might be multiple beans, which is why they have the year of publishing. So bean from 2011. Okay, this is the where I need to go to get that information. So this is important, and I just wanted to make sure we kind of talked about it because sometimes other academic programs require other types of formatting. I know we have some international students that are just not just in the United States, so there might be different expectations in different cultures, in different, the same types of fields, but in other areas. So I just want to acknowledge that. No, MLA, you could be coming from undergrad, we're doing MLA formatting, which is different. So I wanted to make sure I gave you the opportunity to talk about it in this context, but to also re-emphasize that I do expect it to look a little bit more like APA. I'm okay with being somewhat flexible with some of these minor details, but like references page being its own page, that's really important. I'm going to also show you an example as if I were to have done this assignment as the student. I'm going to switch to this. So look, instead of a title page, I put the same type of information and same type of formatting at the top of the page, and we'll move into the content of here, right? Note, typically the title goes in the in the header, excuse me, there's a header and a footer. So in this context, I would have, as a student, put it in all caps. That's the formatting expectations. And yeah, I would have done that in the header. Also, the footer would have page number, which you can look at the website. So I didn't get to do that yet, but here, this is in the assignment initially, right? And so I highlighted it here to be like, I would have taken that out. That's not my writing as a student. I'm not submitting that. And this note is saying we can include this. I can include this as a student, but I should be adding or building. And many students submitted this assignment without adding to this. And so that was a problem when I was reading them because, this is supposed to be your work, not work that was already done for you. This is why I didn't really want to give examples before submitting the assignment. I wanted you to think about, well, what's the best way to explain that to a child, death to a child, based off of everything you've learned in the course thus far. So, yeah, I did expect folks to erase that comment and add another bullet here with some additional information of suggestions. And I would have expected that for both. Okay. So if you kept this formatting, that would have been fine. You could have made these all paragraph formatting. And some folks there were some really great assignments submitted, some presentations on like slideshow, but I want to see more content. I want to know that you understand, how to explain it and you're critically thinking about it and you're not just copying and pasting the text. So another thing is a lot of people did have the references, but they left this comment. And once again, just like erasing that up there, because this is a guide to show you as a student that it should be in APA formatting, references. But references look like that. It doesn't have the parentheses with that. So I would have taken that out and I would have started my references on a new page, starting here, and then continue as that. And then you can refer to those other websites or resources to know how to ensure that it's in the proper up-to-date APA formatting. I even changed my text to Roman Times New Roman, font 12. that has historically, there's a few that are acceptable fonts. So I'm not saying you had to have changed the font, but I'm just sharing how I would have thought about it as a student. Sharing that with you because now you are the ones doing it, and I just didn't feel like a lot of the work that was submitted was really APA formatted. So that's that. Let me see, make sure I touched on my points. So remember that if you quote, you need to do in-text citation. Let me just share back to that other screen. I think I already talked about it actually. So making sure that, yeah, here, when you do a citation, you talk about you make a point, and then you put the in-text citation here, which is last name and the year, last name of all the authors and then the year, right? And then if it were a quote, similar thing, after the quote, you're gonna put that. But this idea is like an idea. I mean, this concept of how you do this in text citation, it means that this sentence, less commonly, however, students are taught the final step of a scientific method. So this concept is not being quoted, it's in this author's own words, but it's the concept from the author from the original text, which is Hogan and Fisher Keller. Okay, so I'd like to see, in the context of this assignment, I would have been okay if it was maybe on the same slide of the topic. Um, there's different ways that would have been potentially acceptable, but some folks they may have copied and pasted the textbook and didn't put any in-text citation at all. That can be plagiarism. So we all need to be careful of that professionally. Everyone needs to be. We all do. All right, so now we're going to move into the context. Bear with me. Just stop sharing. Okay, so I just want to address some of the questions that we had. So one of the first types of questions were, what does it mean when someone or something is in a pet or animal died, and what things to avoid? So basically, you would want to focus on the mechanisms of what it means to be alive and what it means to be dead. Functioning of the body, the major organs. And a lot of people did left the original 3 bullets and maybe added 1 bullet or 2 bullets more. So many of you had the answer in your submission. But some folks jumped into, I would start talking about heaven. And so heaven's going to come later. We're going to talk about the spiritual connections at the bottom, at the end of this presentation. But it's just important to acknowledge that we shouldn't be using that as how we're starting off our conversation with these kids about kids and families about death. We should be emphasizing the concepts for these children that have not developed their abstract thinking yet. They're very concrete thinking, concrete thinkers, or even that could be challenging, right? If they're even younger than that. So mechanisms of the body, the 2 most important organs being the heart, pumps your blood, your lungs to breathe, and how the third might be the stomach or the brain, those major organs and how they have to be working in order for us to be alive. You can make the comparison with animals. Be mindful to have, if you were to use a toy as an analogy, I have a lot of concerns about that because toys are not alive, right? So when you do play, you're doing imaginary play, and if their kids are imagining them to be, they died, they're alive. I would let that be child-led. Um, yeah, and I think one of the video examples that was either posted for this week or it was the previous week, but it was like an example of the interview with the kid. They interviewed two kids, I think it was, and the interviewer asked the children, like, if the toy is alive. And that can be a part of the confusion. The younger child was not able to understand if the toy could be alive or die. The older child was able to say, no, the doll can't die because the doll's not even alive to begin with, right? But that's what I mean, because the toy aspect can be confusing. You're trying to focus on what being alive means, and a toy is not alive. So you can make that comparison. Is a toy alive? And emphasize no. Um, but not, I would be concerned to compare it to a toy breaking or anything like that, because the toy, you could fix a toy. Um, so yeah, just want to be mindful of those things. I would also, I think you guys could tell this, but everybody acknowledge not to avoid euphemisms and things like passed away, emphasizing using the actual word died, death, um, and then avoid telling the child how they should feel, avoid dismissing their feelings. I think you all had that, but I just want to acknowledge that. So describing a funeral and cremation. First of all, which only a few of you really acknowledge, is like, first of all, before you even jump into funeral steps, it's important to acknowledge what's the family's situation, what's their individual circumstances, what are their cultural circumstances, because are they having a funeral is one question. What does a funeral look like for this family? That's going to vary based on cultural experiences. So these are things to make sure we acknowledge and think about. But that would have been an important first first question to ask. And then concentrate on the experience. A lot of you had this. Concentrate on the experiences the child is going to have. What will they see, hear, feel, touch, and taste? They're going to see people, maybe, and this is where an example, right? Are they going to see a lot of people? Are they going to not see a lot of people? Do they expect a lot of turnout? Or is it going to be just their family? Or is it just their family, but you find out that their family is really, really, really big? And that's why it's just their family, right? So are they going to have a lot of people? Where is it going to be? People were saying it's going to be at the church. But once again, the reason I asked that first question is people don't have it at a church. Sometimes it's at a funeral home. Sometimes it's only memorial service, like a luncheon at somebody's house. Like, you really want to understand the context of what you're preparing them for. Um, in the hospital, I don't prepare a kid in the emergency room for the PICU, the intensive care unit. If they're not even going to the intensive care unit, they're going to go to the regular floor. And there's two different types of prep, because there's certain things that are going to be seen and experienced, but they're different based off of where they're going, right? So same thing with what type of funeral or services are going to be held before you're preparing them. And in order to have this conversation, you'd have to have established the conversation about what death is to begin with. And then when it comes to like burial and cremation, focusing on the body. So now after that person's body stops working and it's not functioning and they're not living and they're not walking around and they're not coming home, well, now what? What do we do with the person? The person, what's left of them is their body. Their body is still with us. They're not living, but we have their body here, and they don't need their body anymore. So many people get buried, and they put them in the ground, and they put them in a casket or in a box to help protect their body, and then we put them in the ground, and then they have a place called a grave, which helps to be a place where everyone can come and recognize, and family and friends who love that person can come and uh, visit with them in a way to connect with them and to remember them. Those are my things, how I say it. And now with that established, Now I can say, and other people, some families or some people choose to do something what's called a cremation. And a cremation is a way that I think a lot of you pulled from the text, and I think this was appropriate. Um, but I think the language in the book was room. I might say they go inside of a box, which goes into a machine. I would use the word machine. And the machine gets really, really hot and helps the body to become ashes or sand. I would say like a texture like sand. Um, and a lot of people acknowledge something to avoid was this idea of like burning, fire, because of how that can be threatening. But depending on the age of the child, um, it may be necessary and appropriate to use some of those words because of the truth aspect. And I don't know that anybody really kind of explored the nuances of that in the submissions that when I was reading through them, because, for example, um, a concrete thinker is going to say, well, how does it become sand? How does it become ashes? Right? And I do think there's a level of importance of utilizing well. It is done, it gets really hot because it's a fire. And emphasizing, like, remember how we said that your loved ones, this person has died and they're not feeling anything, so they don't feel any pain. Um, so this doesn't hurt them because they've already died. Um, and with that said, the process of fire, and I would make it compared to like a bonfire. Have they ever gone to a bonfire? Have they ever seen a fireplace? The wood, it burns and it crackles, and then it becomes smaller and smaller. And the same way, the idea is it helps the body to become smaller and smaller until it's small little pieces of sand. That's the way I would have presented it. So I found it interesting that the book emphasized so much not to say those words. Um, but I understand because what I say is non-threatening language, and we don't want to present the story with starting with, so yeah, a cremation is when they burn the body. That is aggressive and what would be threatening. I think you have to build up and explain, and based off of how that child's responding, it actually might be appropriate to bring up fire and avoiding fire if they were to go and be there, or if they heard someone else talk about it, then there's a fire. That's how they make the ashes. That's how they make the sand. That would be more stressful, right? So I think the honesty is really important. It's like the word cancer, right? People say they don't want to use the word cancer, but that's the truth of what the diagnosis might be. And it's actually can be more harmful to not ever say the word cancer, right? So I think that in our field of child life and talking to children, there's a spectrum of different perspectives on certain words. Like some people say, I don't like to use the word poke. I don't like to use the word needle. I prefer to use poke instead of needle, or vice versa. I'm always about whichever word you choose to use, make sure you're explaining it out to the child. So the same thing as I would use the word fire at some point, and I potentially would say the word burn, but I would make sure I'm explaining what I mean by that. And I would not use it with a younger child because of the fact that they're not going to be able to concretely understand that, but they're not concrete thinking. So saying that it gets really hot and it becomes sand might be enough for that. So it's just about the nuances of making sure you're meeting that child where they're at. Talking about a violent death. Um, I think the book emphasized that most of you did generally say to speak about honestly, truthfully, avoid unnecessary details. Um, but I think that, like, let's say somebody was murdered and they were stabbed, and the child is a 7-year-old who wants to know what happened. I think avoiding things like saying that they got stabbed is going to be difficult because that is what happened. And by not saying that, you're withholding information from a 7-year-old who's going to be cognitively able to understand that. And they're going to be likely hear that in the community and family what had happened. However, they got stabbed multiple times and there was blood everywhere. Those are details that are not necessary, right? Um, So I just wanted to like have this video because I wanted to share the nuances of a lot of the thoughts that came up when I was reading some of these responses. Um, there's not always a right answer to how to have these conversations. So I acknowledge that this type of assignment is really challenging because how do you explain this to children? Well, the whole point of our field is that we study the different developmental stages and how you need to meet them where they are individually, based on their developmental needs, based on their developmental understanding of the world and how they interact with it. So it's not just a one size fits all, right? Um, I'm reading my notes here, bear with me. Also, the idea of saying you don't know. Um, and this came up even with me with a patient recently. A patient of mine just went deaf, and deaf as in can't hear. Um, and the language was at the beginning, your hearing could get better, but it might not get better. But it became to a point where the team was telling the parents, you are going to get not going to, they're not, your child's not going to get better. They're not going to get the hearing back. We're 99% sure of it. So then when we were having conversations with the child, people wanted to say, well, can we just say we don't know yet? And we had already been saying that to an extent. And there came a point where when you're working with a 10-year-old, a school age child, it becomes now we know that we're 99% chance that you're not getting your hearing back. We pretty much know that this person's gone deaf. And so when we're making next steps and next plans and having conversations, and if the child's asking, well, when am I going to get my hearing back? It becomes an ethical concern if you're not being honest with them, right? So I want you to be mindful of when you're saying you don't know. Are you saying it to avoid the truth? Then that's probably not the best way to respond to that. And if it's because, for example, a parent doesn't want you to disclose something to their child, then you might want to say something like, that's a good question. You might need to ask your parents about that. Um, I think that's a better conversation to have with your parents because they should be the ones to tell you information about that. That's a way to handle it. I was honest. I didn't say I didn't know, right? So um, I think one of the thoughts in some of the posts were about pain, like if they were experienced pain, um, and if they were stabbed and bled to death. I mean, we know probably did have pain. Um, So is it okay to say I don't know? I mean, you don't know what their experience is, right? So it's tricky. I think it's the truth is though, if we think they were in pain, I mean, it's okay to be truthful and say, I know it really is sad to hear, but it's quite possible they were in pain, but they're not in pain now, and emphasize that. Um, yeah, sometimes people want to say, how do we say this? Because people don't want to say what's the truth, right? Um, so it's about the presentation and then spiritual matters. So um, there was a lot of language around, well, they're in heaven, they're with God, even in some of your responses, even in the questions before leading up to the spiritual specific questions. And I had some comments and some concerns about that. We are, especially if we're the child life specialists, helping children, patients, and families. We're not chaplains. We're not in the area of spiritual support. So we need to be mindful of our scope of practice and our boundaries, right? We need to be mindful of our own perceptions and also understanding that not everyone that we work with is going to have the same perspectives or experiences as well. So given all that, my huge recommendation and philosophy and the way I practice is I will avoid that because that is not the point. My point is to focus on avoiding misconceptions. So when a child is talking, when we're talking about death of a loved one and the child I'm explaining death, I am not going to bring up anything to do with spiritual stuff at all. I will let it be child-led in that sense, and also family-led. So if the parent were sharing it with the child, um, I can listen, I can validate, um, and if a parent said something that was concerning about that could be cause a misconception, excuse me, I might add, okay, and remember that the person has died, so they're not alive, their body's not working, they're not able to hear, they're not able to see, they're not able to talk, they're not able to taste, they're not able to eat, they're not going to go home, they're not going to play, and emphasizing those things. And at the same time, just like your parents said, that your family believes that your brother is in what's called heaven. That's a place where, and I wrote myself a note. I understand that we might want to talk about if we are in a situation where the family wants to talk about this concept of heaven and we are involved in helping the conversation. The way I would describe it is emphasizing like this idea of their spirit is different than their body. So emphasizing all the things about the body that we've already talked about, um, and then talking about the spirit or the soul is more like who you are. And who you are might be your thoughts, your feelings, your connections with others, your love for your family member. And I might put it back on the child, like, who do you think you are? What do you think makes you you? Um, and so it's like about an engaging conversation, but I would have been avoiding that to begin with. I would have been deferring that to the family. I would have said, everyone, every person has different beliefs. Every family has different beliefs and practices. What do you think your parents would believe? What do you think you believe? Putting it back on them rather than having it come up to us. Even if they kind of direct things to me about my beliefs, I try my best to defer it back to the patient and family and validate their experiences and their beliefs. And I really avoid giving my own explanations on what is heaven, what is, where does someone go after they die. I would emphasize more about the body and where the body is physically going to be buried or cremated or where it's going to go, rather than focus on the spiritual aspects, because basically spiritual aspects are abstract, right? And so um, we can have those conversations as adults. Um, but regarding child development, if you consider that it's not until the adolescent years that a child is able to start comprehending those concepts in an abstract way. And so I typically feel like that's not our scope. So um, yeah, I hope that this is helpful. I really wanted to flesh out some of those complexities. Um, oh, one other note I have is that the textbooks was written really for this textbook. Um, I forgot how to say his name. The author's name, Wolf. I think of it like a wolf. Wolfer. Um, finding the words, that textbook. Um, I believe when it says explain what you believe, really is for the parent. It's for the parent to be engaging with the child. Like, I believe this, talking to their child. However, that's not the same. It's not written in the same context as our other textbook is, which is for not healthcare, helping professions. When we are helping someone from a professional, we need to be more objective, neutral, um, and try to not impose. Because once we start putting something out there of ourselves and what we experience, what we believe, that starts to impose on the experience that other person's having. Um, then we all might handle it a little differently. And so I acknowledge that this also might be a lot. Well, parts of it are my style, and I guess I can elaborate on that. And then parts of it is professional boundaries. It's not our place to talk about heaven. It's not our scope of practice. Um, and at the same time, we all have our own personal boundaries. So I know I have a coworker who is Catholic. We had a Catholic family. The child was a teenager, able to understand their level of cognitively able to understand the actually I think it was like a young adult, maybe a 17 or 18-year-old that was the sibling. And my coworker supported this family during the bereavement of the sibling, the patient. And my coworker prayed with this sibling. I just remember listening and learning that and finding that interesting and thinking that's that's what my coworker was comfortable doing. They connected because they were Catholic and Catholic, and they felt comfortable doing that. Whereas, despite my own, well, probably because of my own experiences, I don't feel comfortable having any comments about that, even if it was asked and it was clear about my personal beliefs. I'm very cautious on how much I give up, and that's my own personal boundaries. So I wanted to recommend you to consider your own personal boundaries and consider you want to be sure not to impose anything on the family. All right. I didn't want to go that long talking about all this, but there's a lot of nuances. Um, and I didn't also want to give you something to watch during the week in addition to everything else that you're working on. However, um, I really had to review the grades and look for areas where I could really give a little grace and help to bring up the grades. Um, and I wanted to explain that, and I wanted to explain why. I really want to see APA level writing. I want to see that you're showing me that you're understanding the context and not just copying and pasting. Um, and I wanted to provide some clarity on some of these nuances about talking to children about death. Um, that I don't, that I had some concerns about misconceptions, even from our perspective, learning about how to talk to children, that I would want to support you all in helping to avoid misconceptions with kids that you work with in the future. So with that said, thank you for watching. Let's stop this recording and yeah, have a good one.